History is a carefully curated, meticulously sanitized, and heavily guarded museum. We are taught a very specific, neat, and highly organized timeline of human civilization. We are told a comforting story of slow, steady evolution, from primitive hunter-gatherers discovering fire, to the slow invention of the wheel, to the eventual building of modern megacities. We look at massive, ancient stone monuments scattered across the globe, and we blindly accept the highly improbable, desperately logical explanations offered by modern academia. We desperately want to believe that the history of our fragile planet is completely rational, entirely human, and perfectly safe. But if you're willing to walk past the brightly lit, heavily filtered exhibits of mainstream history, if you possess the courage to step quietly into the dark, dusty, and forbidden basement of human memory, you will immediately collide with a colossal, terrifying, and universally shared anomaly. A deeply unsettling historical reality that absolutely refuses to remain buried in the dirt. Every single ancient isolated culture scattered across the vast, disconnected continents of the earth shares one highly specific, deeply terrifying, and perfectly identical memory. Long before the invention of the internet, long before massive wooden ships crossed the unforgiving oceans to share stories, the ancient separated tribes of humanity all documented the exact same towering nightmare. The Native American tribes of the vast Western Plains fiercely passed down deeply ingrained oral traditions of massive, incredibly violent, red-haired giants who aggressively hunted their ancestors in the dark forests. The ancient, highly sophisticated Greeks built their entire foundational mythology around the terrifying, earth-shaking Titans and the brutal Cyclopes. The fierce, battle-hardened Norse warriors of the freezing northern landscapes whispered in terrified reverence about the massive, chaotic frost giants. The brilliant, mathematically advanced Sumerians carved highly detailed, massive stone reliefs depicting towering, dominant entities ruling over early human civilization. From the dense, suffocating, and unexplored jungles of South America to the burning, arid deserts of the ancient Middle East, the historical record is completely, overwhelmingly saturated with the exact same massive footprint. Modern science, cultural anthropologists, and highly skeptical historians desperately, frantically attempt to dismiss this massive global phenomenon as a strange collective psychological hallucination. They confidently claim it is merely a primitive metaphor, a simple, exaggerated myth designed by ignorant ancient people to creatively explain massive, unidentified animal bones or highly destructive weather events. They have culturally, meticulously conditioned us to relegate the concept of giants to the safe, colorful, and highly sanitized pages of children's fairy tales. But what if it is absolutely not a metaphor? What if the universal, deeply ingrained memory of massive, towering beings actively walking the earth is an absolutely, terrifyingly literal historical fact? What if the most heavily debated, highly controversial, and deeply forbidden verses in the entire biblical text hold the absolute, undeniable key to understanding a forgotten age that modern academia is completely terrified to acknowledge? In this film, we are going to completely shatter the fragile, modern illusion that giants are merely a myth. We are going to open the oldest, most controversial, and deeply mysterious pages of the ancient texts to confront a forbidden truth that has fascinated and terrified scholars for thousands of years. We are going to explore the magnificent, awe-inspiring, and ultimately tragic history of the Nephilim. You are not going to hear a simple, mythological bedtime story. You're going to step directly into a massive, breathtaking ancient world. A primeval era where the absolute boundaries of the cosmos were violently crossed, and a magnificent, hybrid civilization built wonders that still completely baffle modern engineering today. To uncover the absolute, unvarnished truth, you must open the ancient Hebrew text of Genesis, specifically the incredibly brief, deeply cryptic, and profoundly terrifying verses found at the very beginning of chapter 6. Before the catastrophic, world-ending deluge of the Great Flood completely wiped the earth clean, the ancient manuscript records a highly specific, chilling, and monumental cosmic event, a biological and interdimensional intersection that completely violently shattered the natural, intended order of the universe. The ancient text plainly boldly states that when human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. And then, the text delivers the absolute, heavy, and undeniable historical bombshell. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. For centuries, highly uncomfortable modern theologians and deeply skeptical religious scholars have desperately tried to soften, sanitize, and completely redefine these specific, terrifying verses. They have actively engineered safe, comfortable theological explanations, widely known as the Sethite view. They safely argued that the phrase "sons of God" simply referred to the righteous, ordinary human descendants of a man named Seth, and the daughters of men were merely the corrupted, entirely human descendants of Cain. They desperately want you to believe that the deeply terrifying, highly destructive Nephilim were simply the completely natural result of bad human marriages between two rival tribes. They want to completely erase the supernatural, deeply alien element from the text because the actual, literal translation is entirely too terrifying for the highly rational, modern mind to comfortably process. But that sanitized, comfortable theological theory completely fundamentally fails to explain the basic biological math. If an ordinary human man simply marries an ordinary human woman, the absolute, undeniable laws of terrestrial genetics dictate that they will produce an ordinary human infant. They absolutely do not spontaneously, miraculously produce a race of massive, towering, hyper-aggressive giants who completely dominate the global landscape and terrorize the human population. Furthermore, the ancient, original Hebrew language absolutely refuses to be sanitized. The phrase translated as "the sons of God" is B'nai Ha-Elohim. In the strict, highly specific context of the ancient Old Testament, this exact phrase is never ever used to describe ordinary biological human beings. It is a highly specific, undeniable technical term exclusively used to describe direct celestial creations of the divine realm, immortal, highly powerful, and interdimensional angels. The earliest, most highly respected historical traditions, the ancient Jewish mystics, and the brilliant authors of the heavily guarded Dead Sea Scrolls firmly, undeniably understood exactly what this text was describing. It was not a story about human tribes. It was actively documenting a highly coordinated, deeply unnatural, and completely unauthorized cosmic rebellion. A specific faction of highly advanced celestial beings deliberately chose to violently abandon their assigned, sacred habitation in the heavenly realm. Driven by a dark, unnatural fascination and an illicit biological desire, they aggressively crossed the ultimate, unbreakable boundary of the universe, the infinite violently crashing into the finite. The immortal, highly energetic celestial code violently splicing with fragile, biological, human DNA. They descended into the human settlements, and they took human women as their wives. The immediate biological result of this illicit, deeply forbidden interdimensional union was an absolute, catastrophic genetic anomaly. The women gave birth to the Nephilim. The very word Nephilim is deeply, profoundly terrifying in its ancient linguistic root. For centuries, modern English translations have simply substituted it with the word giants. But the direct literal translation of the ancient Hebrew root word Nephal does not simply mean tall men. It translates directly to the fallen ones, or far more aggressively, those who cause others to fall. They were the massive, tragic, and highly destructive physical manifestation of a celestial treason. We must completely aggressively erase the modern cartoonish image of clumsy, slow-moving, and unintelligent ogres dragging wooden clubs through the mud, easily defeated by clever, small human heroes. The Nephilim were absolutely not biological mistakes, because they inherited the highly advanced celestial genetics of their immortal fathers. Combined with the physical adaptability of humanity, they were an elite, hyper-intelligent, and physically devastating race of hybrid demigods. They were the absolute apex predators of the ancient world. The ancient text refers to them as the mighty men of old, men of renown. In the brutal, unforgiving ancient world, renown was absolutely not achieved through gentle acts of diplomacy or kindness. Renown was actively, brutally achieved through absolute, unmatched physical dominance, staggering architectural achievements, and the sheer, unadulterated power of military conquest. When you look at the incredibly complex, deeply fascinating mythologies of ancient Greece, Rome, and Sumeria, you are absolutely not looking at pure fabricated fiction. You are looking at the highly distorted, deeply fading cultural memory of the Nephilim. The massive, towering heroes like Hercules, the brutal, earth-shaking titans, and the deeply powerful, morally corrupt gods of Mount Olympus, who constantly descended to the earth to engage in physical relationships with human women. These ancient global mythologies are the exact, undeniable historical echoes of a time when genetically enhanced, massive, hybrid beings actively, physically ruled the entire planet. They were worshipped as gods because to the fragile, primitive, and entirely biological human beings of the ancient world, they absolutely appeared to be invincible deities. To fully, vividly grasp the sheer staggering magnitude of this devastating event, we must turn to the deeply ancient, highly revered, and heavily suppressed Book of Enoch. This ancient manuscript provides the terrifying, high-resolution details of the absolute darkest chapter in all of human history. According to the ancient traditions, a massive, highly organized legion of 200 powerful celestial entities known as the Watchers physically descended onto the freezing, jagged, and snow-capped summit of Mount Hermon, located in the ancient Near East. On that towering, desolate peak, they swore a heavy, mutual blood oath, deliberately binding themselves together in absolute, unified treason. But according to Enoch, the fallen angels did not just pass down their celestial genetics to their massive offspring. They completely bypassed the natural slow evolution of human civilization by actively, aggressively downloading highly forbidden, deeply advanced celestial technology directly into the minds of the Nephilim and the corrupted human race. They introduced the highly complex, deeply destructive science of metallurgy. A fallen entity named Azazel taught the ancient world exactly how to forcefully extract iron and bronze from the earth to forge massive, heavy, and deeply lethal swords, shields, and breastplates. They introduced advanced mathematics, complex astronomy, and the dark, highly manipulative architectural secrets of the universe. Suddenly, the massive, towering, and hyper-intelligent Nephilim were fully equipped with highly advanced weaponry and ancient, forbidden knowledge. They did not peacefully coexist with the fragile human race. They violently, aggressively subjugated it. The ancient earth was rapidly transformed into a massive, heavily fortified, and deeply majestic global empire ruled entirely by a race of hybrid tyrants. This profound, forbidden historical reality provides a deeply fascinating, highly credible, and utterly awe-inspiring explanation for the massive, inexplicable megalithic architecture found perfectly scattered across the entire globe. If you travel to the ancient, sun-baked ruins of Baalbek in modern-day Lebanon, you will stand completely paralyzed at the base of the massive Temple of Jupiter. Buried deep within its stone foundations are three colossal, perfectly cut, monolithic limestone blocks known to history as the Trilithon. Each individual stone weighs an absolutely staggering 800 tons. They were aggressively quarried, lifted, and perfectly seamlessly fitted together with such terrifying, razor-sharp precision that you cannot even slide a single sheet of paper between them. Modern structural engineers openly admit that moving and elevating these massive stones today would be an incredibly difficult, almost insurmountable logistical nightmare. If you look at the Great Pyramid of Giza, the massive polygonal stone walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, or the colossal, towering statues of Easter Island, modern engineering and traditional archaeology constantly, desperately struggle to fully explain exactly how primitive humans with simple copper chisels and frail hemp ropes achieve such monumental, mathematically perfect feats of construction. But when viewed through the fascinating, deeply mysterious lens of the Nephilim, a completely different, breathtaking alternative history gracefully emerges. What if these massive, megalithic structures were absolutely not built by ordinary, primitive humans? What if they were the grand, magnificent, and towering architectural legacy of the giants? A hybrid civilization possessing immense, superhuman physical strength, combined with the forbidden, highly advanced celestial mathematics and engineering knowledge handed down by their fallen fathers. They built a world of colossal, breathtaking proportions into a magnificent global empire that perfectly matched their own massive, towering physical stature. However, the magnificent, awe-inspiring physical presence of the Nephilim masked a profound, deeply tragic, and rapidly escalating ecological and spiritual crisis. because they were a completely unnatural, highly unauthorized hybrid creation. They possessed a deep, fundamental biological flaw. They inherited the immense power and towering ambition of the celestial realm. But they also inherited the deep, easily corrupted, and highly volatile passions of human biology. They were a magnificent, highly energetic fire completely out of control. As the massive population of the Nephilim rapidly expanded across the beautiful, pristine landscape of the ancient Earth, their immense physical appetites began to severely strain the delicate ecosystem of the planet. Ancient traditions describe the giants as possessing an insatiable bottomless hunger. They rapidly consumed all the vast agricultural acquisitions of ordinary humanity. When the fragile human civilization could no longer physically produce enough food to satisfy the massive, towering rulers of the earth, the Nephilim turned their highly aggressive, immensely powerful attention toward the natural animal kingdom. They devoured the birds, the beasts, and the fish, completely, irrevocably shattering the delicate ecological balance of the ancient world. And then, in the absolute darkest, most terrifying escalation of their heavily corrupted biological nature, the ancient texts record that the massive giants turned violently, aggressively against humanity itself. They began to systematically, brutally slaughter and consume human beings. They drank human blood. The entire massive ancient world was completely, entirely consumed by absolute, unadulterated, and unimaginable violence. The pristine, beautiful biological architecture of the human race, the exact, perfect DNA originally designed by the Creator, was being systematically, aggressively polluted and completely eradicated by the massive, spreading hybrid bloodlines. It was a massive planetary-level genetic crisis. The human race was standing on the absolute terrifying precipice of total, irreversible biological extinction. And the absolute highest authority in the universe heard the agonizing cry of the broken earth. The majestic, terrifying, and completely uncompromising forces of the celestial realm heavily prepared to respond. The response was not going to be a localized rescue mission or a gentle warning. It was going to be the absolute most catastrophic, devastating, and entirely apocalyptic planetary sterilization protocol in the history of the universe. The Great Flood was not an act of random anger. It was a desperate, highly surgical intervention to save the last remaining thread of pure human DNA. The towering, arrogant giants who believed they were invincible gods were about to face the crushing, unstoppable, and absolute wrath of the true Creator. The massive, towering waters were rapidly gathering. But the most deeply fascinating, intensely mysterious, and highly debated aspect of the Nephilim story does not end with the crashing, overwhelming waters of the global deluge. Because Genesis chapter 6 contains a tiny, incredibly enigmatic, and highly terrifying phrase that has completely baffled scholars for millennia. It explicitly states that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. The massive, crushing waters of the Great Flood eventually receded, leaving behind a completely silent, washed, and heavily sterilized earth. The gigantic, blazing iron forges of the Watchers were permanently buried beneath millions of tons of heavy mud and sediment. The massive, corrupted hybrid giants that had violently terrorized the pre-flood world had been completely drowned out of existence. Noah and his family stepped off the massive wooden ark onto a pristine, biologically reset planet. The divine natural order of human genetics had been forcefully, magnificently restored. But as the pages of the ancient text turn, a deeply chilling, highly unsettling historical reality rapidly emerges. The towering nightmare was absolutely not over. The ancient Hebrew manuscript of Genesis chapter 6 contains a tiny, incredibly enigmatic, and highly terrifying phrase that has completely baffled scholars, historians, and theologians for millennia. It explicitly states that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. The exact biological mechanism of their dark return remains one of the most fiercely debated mysteries in all of biblical history. Did another, highly localized incursion of fallen angels occur after the deluge? Did the recessive, highly corrupted genetic markers of the Nephilim somehow survive through the complex bloodlines of Noah's descendants? The ancient text keeps the specific biological origin shrouded in heavy, suffocating mystery, but the massive, terrifying physical consequences of their return are explicitly, undeniably documented. Fast forward centuries later to the hot, shifting sands of the Sinai Peninsula. The massive nation of Israel, having just miraculously escaped the oppressive, heavy chains of the Egyptian Empire, was standing directly on the borders of the Promised Land. Moses, acting as the supreme commander of the wandering nation, selected 12 elite, highly trained spies to quietly cross the border and meticulously scout the land of Canaan. They were expecting to find a beautiful, fertile land occupied by ordinary, manageable human tribes. What they actually discovered completely, violently shattered their minds and paralyzed the entire nation in absolute biological terror. When the 12 elite spies nervously returned to the Israelite camp after 40 days of covert reconnaissance, their intelligence report was deeply, fundamentally catastrophic. They openly confirmed that the land was indeed incredibly fertile, famously flowing with milk and honey. But the tactical situation on the ground was a sheer, unimaginable nightmare. They reported that the people living there were of massive, towering size, and that their cities were heavily fortified with massive stone walls that seemed to reach all the way to the heavens. And then they delivered the specific, terrifying intelligence that completely broke the spirit of the entire Israelite army. They explicitly stated, "We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." They had encountered a fierce, massive, and highly aggressive tribe known as the Anakim, who were direct, undeniable descendants of the giant bloodlines. This was absolutely not a poetic metaphor for feeling politically insecure. It was a literal, deeply terrifying biological size comparison. The sheer, overwhelming psychological terror of facing a highly advanced race of towering, hybrid predators caused a massive, chaotic rebellion in the camp. Millions of Israelites completely refused to advance, choosing to wander aimlessly in the harsh, burning desert for 40 agonizing years, rather than face the terrifying descendants of the Watchers in battle. When the next generation, fiercely led by the brilliant military strategist Joshua, finally crossed the Jordan River to execute the conquest of Canaan, the military campaign is widely, tragically misunderstood by modern history. Modern critics heavily condemn the ancient Israelites, calling their sweeping military operations a ruthless, unjustified territorial conquest. But when vividly viewed through the dark, deeply mysterious lens of the Nephilim, The entire campaign takes on a completely different, profoundly massive cosmic context. It was not a random land grab. It was a highly targeted, divinely mandated genetic cleanup operation. Joshua and his fiercely loyal armies were actively, systematically hunting down the specific, heavily fortified cities and the isolated mountain strongholds that harbored the corrupted hybrid DNA. The ancient texts meticulously list the terrifying massive tribes they encountered: the Anakim, the Zuzim, the Emim, and the Rephaim. These were not ordinary biological human societies. They were massive, heavily armed warrior cultures that possessed immense superhuman physical strength and an inherent, deeply ingrained hostility toward the pure, uncorrupted human race. Consider the terrifying, highly documented historical account of King Og of Bashan. He is explicitly, clearly identified in the ancient texts as one of the absolute last remaining survivors of the Rephaim. He ruled over a massive, incredibly powerful northern kingdom containing 60 heavily fortified, high-walled stone cities. To help the modern rational mind fully comprehend the sheer, staggering physical size of this ancient hybrid monarch, the biblical text provides a chilling, highly specific architectural detail that completely defies modern human anatomy. The ancient manuscript explicitly records the exact measurements of his personal bed. His bed, heavily constructed entirely of solid cold iron, was 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. When translated into modern measurements, that is over 13.5 feet long and 6 feet wide. You absolutely do not build a massive 13-foot bed of solid, heavy iron for a normal, ordinary human king. King Og was a towering, heavily muscled behemoth, a terrifying remnant of a forbidden age, completely dominating the northern landscape. The Israelite army, heavily backed by the absolute authority of the Creator, completely annihilated his massive kingdom, erasing one of the largest remaining genetic threats from the face of the earth. Fascinatingly, if you travel to the exact, heavily contested modern region of the Golan Heights today, archaeologists have discovered a massive, ancient, and completely unexplained megalithic stone monument known as Rujim el-Heri. In the ancient Hebrew language, it is called Gilgal Rephaim, which translates directly to the Wheel of the Giants. It is a massive, highly complex astronomical observatory composed of over 40,000 tons of heavy, unhewn basalt fieldstones, arranged in 5 massive, concentric circles. It completely defies the primitive capabilities of the nomadic tribes of the era. Many ancient historians and bold archaeologists strongly suspect this massive, towering stone architecture was the direct physical handiwork of King Og and the terrifying Rephaim. Despite Joshua's brilliant, highly successful extermination campaigns, a few scattered, desperate remnants of the giant bloodlines managed to escape the flashing iron blades of the Israelites. They fled to the western coastal plains, specifically heavily integrating into the highly advanced, deeply aggressive cities of the Philistines. They concentrated their corrupted bloodlines in massive, heavily fortified coastal cities like Gaza, Ashdod, and Gath. For centuries, they quietly rebuilt their strength, biding their time in the dark shadows of the ancient Near East. Centuries later, the dark, lingering shadow of the Nephilim aggressively, violently resurfaced in the dry, rocky expanse of the Valley of Elah. This brings us directly to the most famous, yet heavily sanitized, and deeply misunderstood battle in all of human history. The epic, monumental clash between a young shepherd named David and the ultimate Philistine champion, Goliath. Modern religious culture and beautifully illustrated Sunday school materials desperately condition us to picture a small, innocent, and highly vulnerable boy with a tiny, wooden toy slingshot, bravely standing up to a slightly tall, clumsy, and slow-moving soldier. But the historical, unfiltered, and deeply terrifying reality of the ancient text paints a completely different, heavily militarized picture. This was an absolutely terrifying face-to-face encounter with a highly trained, heavily armored, genetically enhanced apex predator. Goliath of Gath was not just a tall man, he was a champion, a pure, undeniable descendant of the ancient Anakim giants. The ancient text meticulously, clinically details his massive, terrifying physical specifications to ensure the reader understands the sheer impossibility of the situation. He stood over 9 feet tall. He wore a massive, overlapping scale armor coat of solid bronze that weighed an absolutely staggering 125 pounds. The heavy, sharp iron point of his massive spear alone weighed 15 pounds. He was a walking, heavily armored, interdimensional tank, completely immune to the standard weaponry of ordinary men. For 40 agonizing days, this massive, heavily armed hybrid aggressively descended into the valley. His booming, terrifying voice echoed violently off the steep canyon walls, aggressively, arrogantly, challenging the entire army of Israel to send out a single man to fight him. The battle-hardened Israelite soldiers, including their own tall and capable King Saul, were completely, utterly paralyzed by sheer biological terror. They knew that engaging this massive descendant of the fallen ones in close quarters, hand-to-hand combat was absolute immediate suicide. And then, a young shepherd named David boldly steps onto the tense, heavily watched battlefield. He completely refuses to wear the heavy, cumbersome bronze armor offered by the king, knowing it would only severely restrict his movements against a vastly superior physical force. He walks down into the dry, rocky valley armed with absolutely nothing but a deep, unwavering faith in the Creator and a highly lethal, ancient, kinetic weapon, a simple leather shepherd's sling. But there is a deeply fascinating, highly strategic detail hidden in the text that completely changes the context of this epic encounter. Why did David carefully, deliberately kneel down by the dry riverbed and select exactly 5 smooth, heavy stones? It was absolutely not because he lacked confidence and wanted backup ammunition in case he missed his first shot. Ancient historical records and subsequent biblical texts explicitly reveal that Goliath was not the only giant standing on the battlefield that day. He had 4 massive, highly dangerous, and equally terrifying brothers standing directly behind him in the Philistine ranks. David was fully, completely prepared to systematically execute the entire remaining genetic bloodline right there in the valley. The terrifying, heavily armored giant looked down at the unarmored shepherd and aggressively mocked him, cursing him by the dark, ancient gods of the Philistines. But David did not flinch. He delivered a magnificent, deeply inspiring, and heavily prophetic declaration that still echoes through history. He boldly stated to the towering giant that he came against him in the name of the Lord of armies, and he declared loudly that the battle absolutely does not belong to the sword or the massive spear. The battle belongs to the Creator. With terrifying, blinding speed, David rapidly spun the leather sling and aggressively unleashed the heavy, smooth stone. It flew through the hot valley air and struck the massive giant directly in the very center of his forehead. The only tiny fraction of his body left exposed by his heavy bronze helmet. The stone struck with the massive kinetic impact of a modern ballistic bullet, sinking deep into the thick bone of his skull. The massive, towering champion of Gath, the terrifying heavy descendant of the fallen ones, violently collapsed face first into the dirt with a thundering crash. The era of the giants actively terrorizing the ancient Near East was permanently ended by a shepherd's absolute, unyielding faith. In the years following David's ascent to the throne, his elite, highly trained special forces systematically hunted down the remaining brothers of Goliath. They violently struck down Ishbi-Benob, Saph, and a deeply mutated giant possessing exactly 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. With these final, heavily coordinated executions, the massive, terrifying Nephilim were eventually completely erased from the physical landscape of the earth. But their dark, heavy, and deeply unsettling legacy still profoundly haunts the human psyche. Why does modern academia so fiercely, aggressively suppress the overwhelming archaeological anomalies found across the globe? Why do we constantly find historical accounts from early 19th century explorers discovering massive, oversized human skeletons in ancient burial mounds, only to have those bones completely vanish into the dark hidden vaults of massive institutions? Why do we comfortably hide behind sanitized myths and Hollywood cartoons? Because acknowledging the absolute terrifying reality of the Nephilim fundamentally destroys the neat, safe, and heavily controlled secular narrative of human evolution. It aggressively, violently forces modern humanity to confront a deeply terrifying truth. We are absolutely not alone in the cosmos. The universe is highly structured, deeply mysterious, and the fragile biological boundaries between dimensions are vastly more permeable than we ever dare to admit. The ancient, a magnificent story of the Nephilim is the ultimate, absolute warning for the modern age. It vividly, terrifyingly demonstrates exactly what happens when the absolute boundaries established by the Creator are arrogantly breached. It shows the devastating, catastrophic consequences of acquiring forbidden knowledge and engaging in highly unnatural genetic manipulation. As modern, highly advanced humanity actively experiments with splicing DNA, utilizing CRISPR technology, creating biological chimeras, and aggressively reaching for supreme, godlike technological power through transhumanism, we must desperately ask ourselves a chilling question. Are we blindly, arrogantly walking right back into the exact same trap that completely destroyed the pre-flood world? Jesus Christ issued a highly specific, deeply terrifying prophetic warning regarding the end of human history. He stated plainly, "As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man." Are we currently rebuilding the days of Noah in our modern laboratories? The towering hybrid giants may be buried deep beneath the cold, silent dirt. Their massive, inexplicable megalithic monuments standing as silent, heavily weathered witnesses to a forgotten, forbidden age. But the profound, epic battle between the massive arrogance of the fallen and the unyielding, beautiful light of the Creator continues to echo powerfully through every single generation. The physical giants may be dead, but the profound spiritual war for the biological soul of humanity is still fiercely raging today. If you want to uncover the absolute deepest and most heavily guarded and ancient mysteries of our world, if you possess the courage to look past the heavily sanitized exhibits of modern history and discover the magnificent hidden truths of human origins, subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the shadows of the comments below, do you believe the massive global megalithic ruins were built by primitive humans with simple tools? Or are they the undeniable towering architectural footprint of the Nephilim? Do you believe our modern obsession with genetic engineering is leading us directly back to the terrifying days of Noah? The truth is waiting in the dark to be unearthed.